Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Elevate GM's Roundtable as part of the GM Green Summit. For those of you who have not met before, my name's Ilona Alcock and I'm the co-founder and director of Elevate Greater Manchester. I've had the privilege of working closely with the green industries in Greater Manchester over the last few years, and also in seeing the rise of sustainability and focus on zero carbon across all the different sectors in the region. I'm very proud to sit on the GM City Green Comms Board, and one of the things that I've really noticed is that whilst we have these fantastically ambitious targets and these really impactful projects going on at a GMCA level, that's not necessarily filtering down to the business community. And so what we really wanted to achieve with this roundtable is to bring together a range of senior business people, business leaders in the region, to talk about what their focus is on environment, on sustainability, on working towards that zero carbon future, and hopefully helping to raise awareness of how important it is to bring businesses from all sectors together if we are going to meet these ambitious targets. So I'm now going to go in turn to our speakers so they can introduce themselves and let you know a little bit about what they'll be focusing on today. So if I could come to you first, Kat.
Great, thank you so much for that introduction. So I'm Kat McGettigan. I'm a board director at the international comms agency Grayling, and I head up the Manchester office. We work with a really wide range of businesses, and we actually have 9 offices in the UK, so it's quite interesting, as Lona was saying, about kind of balancing kind of city-specific agendas with kind of wider national and international agendas. My background is last sort of 15 years working a lot within the retail sector. So again, very interesting sector to kind of be involved about how do they push forward. And I think, they've pioneered a lot of stuff over the last, not only this year, but prior to that as well. So I'll be really interested to kind of share my views on kind of the retail community as well as the broader comms industry as well.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Kat. Charlie, if I could come to you next.
Good morning. Yes, Charlie Tomlinson. I'm a partner and head of construction, engineering and energy at Kuits. Kuits, one of the oldest law firms in Manchester, and one of a rare breed now of being a single site office, being wholly Manchester based. So whilst I have a client base throughout the UK, our passion is very much being linked with Manchester's projects, and particularly the green economy. My background is primarily construction law, but in amongst that I've worked in industry for one of the largest waste management companies in the UK, where I was fairly hands-on with waste to energy and other renewable projects, and also developing a polymers recycling project, which was one of the first in Europe. So currently working with a wide client base, from owner-managed businesses to large organisations, to help them refocus their businesses and really take the low carbon agenda by storm.
Fantastic, thank you. Melissa?
Hi there. So I'm Melissa Bell. I'm the Sustainable Procurement Manager at YPO. We are a public sector buying organisation, so we provide goods and services on behalf of other public sector organisations. We're owned by 13 local authorities across the north of England, but our customer base is UK wide, so we are a national organisation. My role within YPO is to embed sustainability within our procurement offerings. So that's there to really help our customers then drive forward their own sustainability objectives, while also trying to coordinate our own objectives as a organisation as well, in terms of our sustainability journey.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Dennis, if I could come to you next.
Thanks, Ilona. Hi everyone, I'm Dennis Higgins. I'm the Business Development Leader for Slalom in Manchester. We're a modern consulting firm where we help our clients with high value, high impact projects around strategy, technology and business transformation. We established our Manchester office just recently in 2019, and we have a very local model, which is quite different than other professional services organisations. Like Kat mentioned earlier, I'm quite interested in how some of the local initiatives overlap, given that we have 30 offices across the world, including the US, UK and Australia. I'm also a non-exec member of the Audit Committee at Wrekin Housing Group, which is a large housing association with 13,000 homes. In my background, I've spent sort of 10 years working in the energy sector around the energy, engineering, sustainability agenda. So hopefully I'll be able to bring a few different perspectives, both from professional services, technology, housing construction and energy.
Brilliant, thank you. Scott?
Can you hear me? Hi, hi, thanks Ilona. My name's Scott Hadden. I am a Director and Chief Experience Officer at a tour operator called Bratt Travel, based here in Manchester. Whilst our small team is based here, we send people across the globe and have local suppliers on every continent except Antarctica. So as you can imagine, sustainability and carbon footprints are challenging, and also something we are very, very aware of, and it's obviously a very interesting topic and a very important one for the whole of the travel industry, I think, as we move to a post-pandemic world. And as you said, the climate crisis is not going anywhere, and we're very conscious that travel has a role to play in improving that.
Absolutely, thanks very much. And last but not least, Katie.
Hi, thank you, Ilona. So I'm Katie Robson. I'm the co-founder and director alongside Ilona at Elevate GM, a recently created business development consultancy where we'll be delivering various events covering the key sectors within the local industrial strategy, of which the green sort of sustainability area is one. And we're really keen to translate some of that policy and inspiration into reality for businesses within the sort of Greater Manchester community.
Thanks very much, Katie. Looking forward to getting cracking on all of that. So thanks again to all of you for joining us. I think just from that quick round of introductions, we can see just how varied the issues are and the different competing factors that businesses will need to look at when trying to work towards these things, also making sure that we have viable businesses and that we're serving the world in this kind of post-pandemic phase. So one of the things that I'm kind of keen to hear from all of you is what work your organisations are doing to work towards sustainability targets. So that may be the 5-year environmental plan that we have in Greater Manchester, but also just in kind of hearing some of your experiences, there is obviously a national and an international element to that as well. So we're just going to go back round in the same order to keep things nice and simple. So if I could come to you, Kat, just to give us a bit of an idea around what Grayling and also the kind of retail industry are doing to work towards those targets.
Yeah, so I think what's really interesting in the comms industry is, a lot of our team are under 30. So I actually think that is a really interesting dynamic between, this isn't a nice to have anymore for these guys. This is like, has to be absolutely ingrained and embedded. And even when I talk to some of my team about their views on things like veganism or sustainable products, it's just such a shift, even from someone who, I'm not going to give you my age right off, but nearing 40, that 10-year divide. So actually I think in the comms industry, it's so important that we are taking these issues around sustainability and how do we create more sustainable environments for our teams. I think I think this year's been really interesting for us. So obviously we had environmental policies across all of our offices before, and I'm sure like everybody, things like boiling hot water taps, automatic lighting systems, all of those things, which kind of small things, but that can make a big difference. But I think the biggest thing for us, and I'm sure Scott will obviously have a strong view on this, was business travel. I mean, I would have thought nothing last year. I said I was working a lot between Hong Kong and London, of jumping on planes every couple of weeks. And I think, the thought for me is to have done a virtual pitch, even last year, would have felt really kind of alien, and probably I wouldn't have been keen if a pitch had come in and said it's going to be over video, because I think particularly for the comms industry, it's all about people and connections. But I think, one of the positives that we've definitely seen out of the pandemic is that this is all doable to be able to do virtually. And I don't think that's to say, sorry, Scott, not picking on you, I don't think that's to say we're never going to not jump on planes again, but I think people will be much more mindful about kind of considering that. So I think for us, looking at kind of how we've moved into kind of reflecting the needs and kind of wants of our team, because as I said, the majority of them are under 30, so this is something ingrained in their kind of DNA. I think, you know, the consideration between, and not just flying, you know, travel between kind of our 9 offices. And I think then flipping it kind of with more of a perspective on the retail industry, you know, I said in my introduction, but retailers have been kind of really kind of on the front foot around plastic for quite a while. I think, you know, if we look at brands like Iceland, who obviously a great brand from the region, who really pioneered kind of the plastic debate a couple of years ago. But I think, again, a lot of people have been at home, obviously, during this time. And I think it's also heightened a bit, like people are still confused around, you know, what is recyclable, how can I change my kind of behaviour? So I think, again, there's a bit of this shift of kind of, you know, I know mindfulness is quite a buzzword of the year around a lot of stuff as well. But I think for the retailers, you know, having to look at packaging, having to look at delivery, and I think, you know, from a fashion perspective, we've obviously seen lots of headlines over the last few weeks around kind of how sustainable is, you know, producing clothes for £1 in factories that maybe aren't setting the best standards. So I think there's a lot of kind of reflection on that front. So yeah, I think it's a massive issue from both a kind of micro in terms of our industry, but a kind of macro from a retailing perspective as well.
Thanks, Kat. And yeah, I think a couple of points raised are really interesting. One is that there does seem to be that generational shift. I'm like you, not in that under 30 bracket, but definitely see that as more and more it's what people expect from their employers as well as the brands that they engage with. And yeah, absolutely, that time at home, I think we've all had a bit of a reflection piece, and whether that's been personally or for our companies, I think that will lead to some kind of bigger changes, and it will be interesting to see what comes out of there. So moving on to you then, Charlie, again, just looking at those kind of move towards sustainability targets.
Yes, and I think following on what Kat said there, you know, there have been some massive changes this year in people's mindsets. I mean, we'd obviously been doing, like a lot of similar firms, been working around reducing paper, you know, heating and lighting systems, trying to reduce travel, but we're now in a situation where we have all learnt how to work virtually. I think it is going to change the way that all law firms operate and how legal services are delivered. And I think that will chime with industries, because industries now are more accepting of dealing with Zoom and team calls and reducing the amount of travelling around the country. The difficulty, the big challenge, I think, will be twofold, really. Again, you know, we have a significant number of junior and younger members of staff, and it's how you can train and engage them when you are at the same time trying to reduce the amount of time and commuting time and spending time in the office. So I think that's going to be a real challenge. And I think also that sense of community, the business community as well. I think it's going to be really quite interesting to see how this plays out, because, you know, being part of concentric circles of community within your firm, within, you know, your local industry, you know, being part of Manchester and the Manchester scene and face-to-face business development, I think for a lot of junior staff, it's going to be quite challenging. Just now looking at the industries I'm in, I mean, obviously the energy industry is right at the forefront. The construction industry is very influenced by this. Again, market is demanding that new buildings are environmentally sustainable, the products they're using are sustainable, and that the energy consumption is very low. The challenge for the construction industry is making all that at a price point that consumers are prepared to buy. And I think that is going to be a challenge going forward, is as performance specifications become tighter, you know, how are we going to make sure that we've got the supply chain to be able to deliver at prices that people can afford? So that'll be an interesting, I'll look forward to seeing how that pans out over the next couple of years.
Absolutely, and I think you've touched on there on a couple of those kind of competing priorities. And for those of you who are perhaps not aware, my background's actually in law. I used to work as a commercial litigation solicitor, and the idea of completing my training contract and not being sitting in the same room as a supervisor is a little bit terrifying, because it's those little questions all the time. And I think there's been a lot of focus on the advantages of working from home, and there are many advantages to doing that, but that ongoing support of having somebody that, you know, you don't have to phone them, you don't have to get them up on a Teams call, you can just overhear things and learn as you're in the office is something that we need to make sure we don't lose that. And then it's that, what price are we prepared to pay for sustainability? And I think you touched on it as well, Kat, in terms of retail, that there is this kind of cost driver as to what we want to pay and what we've become used to paying for things, and what we need to pay to be able to have the level of sustainability that we're aiming for. And it's interesting to see where that pressure is going to be. Will it be a regulatory thing of this is the standard that we have to meet and that's going to push everybody's prices up, or will it be driven more from consumers? So yeah, I think there will be some very interesting choices to be made there. So Melissa, if I could come on to you next.
Yeah, sure. So I think it's actually interesting following on from that. I think what we did at YPO is a couple of years ago actually took a step back and actually tried to understand what the word sustainability actually meant, trying to understand it, because I think a lot of people band it about, and for different people it means different things. And I actually use the term sustainability and social value a little bit interchangeably. So we took some time out to understand what it meant, and what it meant to us and to our customers, so we could actually then try and focus some of our attention. And actually, if our customers are saying these are important to them, okay, so how can we make sure it's important to us to enable them to do what they need to do as well? So we took a real step back to try and figure that out, and I think we ended up coming out with 5 key themes, which were quite challenging to kind of get to, I suppose, in some respect, because we're also a national organisation, so trying to understand what was important to all our customers nationally, and trying to bring that together in some kind of way was difficult, because we've already mentioned that actually, you know, there is a lot of themes running through that actually are the same, but everyone is slightly different as well. And we also turned towards the UN Sustainable Development Goals as a bit of a header, not something that we wanted to be led by, but actually also make sure we were aware of and could report against if we wanted to, if we needed to say actually where we were having those impacts as well. So I spent a lot of time looking at what our customers were saying, look at what our suppliers were saying, and trying to kind of navigate that whole space, which was quite challenging, I suppose, as well.
I think quite challenging is probably an understatement there. So all credit to you, first of all, for taking the time away to do that, because it is a massive piece of work, particularly with the nuances nationally. Interesting there mentioning the SDGs. So I've been part of an organisation called Junior Chamber International for the last 9 years, and we're a partner organisation of the United Nations. So we're one of the organisations that helped to create the Millennium Development Goals, and then later on to the Sustainable Development Goals. And it's been kind of part of my world for a while, and it surprises me how little that's kind of known about within the business community. And I think it doesn't necessarily help that we're at now that kind of, you know, 17, 18 goals, depending whether you include like the partnerships, but it's a lot to focus on. So I think that work that you've done to distill that down to kind of 5 key themes is probably quite important, that it's enough that you've covered everything, but without kind of splintering off into so many different areas to support. So yeah, all credit to you as an organisation for giving that a go. And if you're happy to, it'd be brilliant if you could share some of that work that we can send out afterwards, because I think it's probably something that a lot of businesses would be really interested in seeing. So if I can go then on to Dennis.
Thanks, Ilona. I think for me it's really interesting to see you know, how consumer and societal demands over the sort of past 10 or 15 years have really changed, and I think really raised the profile of the green agenda, but also driven a shift, I think, away from just talking about the environment to actually a much more holistic conversation about sustainability. So the approach that we take at Slalom is much more broad. It's quite holistic in terms of our commitments around sustainability. So we've sort of looked at more than 6 sort of different frameworks, including the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, and as I said earlier, had input from 30 plus local markets to try and really distill down, well, what is our strategy in this space? And we've distilled that down to 4 kind of core areas. So people, economy, community, and all of that underpinned by the environment. And that translates into a 10-year plan that takes us out to 2030. And I've got to be honest, we're pretty humble in our approach here because we're still learning. We just went through our first sustainability assessment earlier this year, just pre-pandemic or on the cusp of the pandemic. So we've built in, I think, some of the learnings over that time as well. But we've made some pretty big commitments as part of that. So, you know, by 2030, we want to be carbon negative, for instance. So there's quite a lot of work for us to do. I suppose what's interesting is hearing a few of the other panelists talk about, you know, professional services and so the typical carbon footprint sort of agenda. For us, that's not so much an issue because of our local model. So because we live and work in the local community, we don't actually have that much travel, even though we have multiple offices within, you know, country, for example. We rarely travel between, say, Manchester and London. So I think that's quite interesting. And within our approach, our strategy, we also focus a lot on things like culture and well-being. So I thought it was really interesting to hear others mention that as well. And that, you know, extends into things like mental health and you know, how their families are feeling, as well as just the individuals. So I think it's important that we have that really holistic approach when we talk about sustainability, rather than trying to compartmentalise it to one particular factor. And I think just flipping over to Wrekin and the sort of housing sector, so very interesting, a range of very interesting strategies there. And I think that the challenge is public policy is still really developing in that space. So it does make it hard to very commit to some of the programs that you know, you're able to do where it's just something for your organisation. Though in that space we are trying to work with industry specialists to be able to understand, you know, how we can leverage more emerging green technologies to solve some of our customers' issues, and looking to develop a strategy over the next 12 months. But it's fair to say that's still much more in development in that sector.
Fantastic, yeah, and I think that holistic approach is exactly right. I know we've spoken before about Slalom from that having that very kind of local market, and probably the main driver for that conversation was the well-being of staff, and probably environment didn't feature in that conversation. And it's quite interesting as you talk to businesses that sometimes their reason for doing something can have these then myriad of other benefits that, you know, if you're doing the right thing, it probably has several positive impacts, and again would be a really interesting one to share out those kind of reports that you've got, because I think there probably is a lot other organisations can learn from that. So going to come to you now, Scott. We've obviously, I think, all spoken a little bit around travel, which is ancillary to every other business, but at the absolute heart of what you do. So would be really interesting to see kind of what steps you're taking around sustainability.
Yeah, sure. I mean, first of all, I think it's almost impossible to talk for the entire travel market. We sell very little of what you'd consider to be the package holiday, although, you know, package holiday is a legal term. But, you know, I think there's going to, obviously, sustainability and carbon footprints and all this varies hugely between going on cruises, which we do very little of, and, you know, going to an eco resort in the South Pacific. So, you know, first of all, I think I'm glad this is called sustainability and not eco, because I think probably there is no such thing as ecotourism. I think we have to be aware that tourism and travel has an impact on the planet. We can make decisions to minimise our impact and make the impact in the right way, but I think it's very hard to do that activity and be carbon negative without taking additional steps after travel to counter that. I think the pandemic is going to have a huge shift in travel, and I think it could split, and I think we won't know what that impact is. I think certainly with Echo, we do a little bit of business travel, but not so much. I think the business travel market will be hit particularly hard as people move towards being more comfortable dealing online. But I think that will vary around the world. I think for lots of markets, face-to-face meetings and travelling abroad is still seen as very much like the norm and a sign of success, and they'll want to continue to do that. So I think, eco, we have to be careful of is a buzzword, and, let's be honest, being cynical, lots of resorts will say they're eco to bring the foreign tourists in, and they're not eco at all. So for us, sustainability is more than just carbon footprint. I think it's also about how much money stays in the local economy. So we tend to work where possible with local providers. And also, how those local providers not just deliver the travel, but also what they do back to their local environment, because most people working in travel around the world are in a relatively privileged position, even in what we would deem to be a poorer country, for lack of a more eloquent word. So like in Madagascar, for example, our local partner, part of their profits go to take children off the streets and to give them an education and to feed them. And to us, that's an amazing benefit of people going to see their extraordinary country. I think certainly the most damaging part of travel is over-tourism, and to be honest, you don't need to go that far away from home to see the damages of that. It's particularly rife in places like Venice, which has long since been talked about of it, and I think it's certainly going to be a few years perhaps before the mass numbers of tourists come back, and it depends what lessons that we learn in that time. I think we have an opportunity to move towards a more sustainable model that is better for the local communities and a better experience for tourists. Like, no one really wants to queue up for an hour to take a picture of a fountain, but that's what we do. But the risk is, travel companies have been hurt more than anyone. I mean, effectively, there's been no income. Many companies haven't been able to furlough staff because they've been busy doing refunds, so not generating any income. So if discounts come to bring tourists back, then it depends whether or not we'll go back the same way. So I don't really have any answers at the moment, because I think I have a vision for what I want my company to do, but whether that won't be echoed across the whole industry. Although I would say that actually the industry is, on the whole, very, very aware of the impacts of it. And I think the vast majority of travel wants to improve. Certainly the big companies, I think, are very focused on plastic and carbon footprint, because I think that's where the mass media is at. And I think when you come to smaller providers like us, I think you realise it's a much more multi-layered discussion to be had with both the countries that we're sending people to and the customers that we're sending there.
Yeah, and I think that's so important that we don't get fixated on one tracker, and I think that's true of any industry. You can kind of look at one bit and be like, we've ticked the box, we've done that, we can say we're green, we can say we're eco, but it's actually looking at it and being like, well, if that's creating harm somewhere else, that's not necessarily the right thing to be doing. And like you say, the travel industry is so varied. What you do to compare to what some of the kind of the other suppliers do are very, very different, and may need to take very different approaches. So quite usefully, you've all, as we've gone through there, chatted a little bit around changing consumer needs, what you're kind of seeing in your industries that they're demanding from companies. So I'm just going to ask all of you to kind of come with, one or two kind of real key trends that you're seeing amongst your kind of customer base. And I'm going to come to Katie first, because I know we've done a lot of work with professional services, but in kind of cross sectors across Manchester. Are you seeing, Katie, that there's an increase in sustainability generally across those industries, or are you kind of seeing any particular trends?
I think that, as we've just discussed, I think there's a few key areas really where a lot of businesses really want to demonstrate and buy into that kind of local ambition for the sort of the 2038 carbon neutral sort of target. But it's then kind of what's the reality of that and making it happen. And I think, as we sort of discussed, I think it's that incentive from a financial perspective, what's prohibitive, and, when people really looking at things like, if they're in a building where they pay a service charge and they're, sort of the waste is being disposed of and that's taken care of, how do businesses kind of break away from that, and how do they, from a financial perspective, make that viable? And I think it's really about breaking down sort of how we really sort of support businesses to make that a reality. And I think we've done a couple of events with a couple of really interesting local businesses who, and hopefully someone's now doing their garden, who it's surprising where that responsibility lies. So who takes that control, who's leading the change, who's driving it forward? And I think we've done a few events where you know, we've pulled in speakers from a couple of big Manchester names that you think, yeah, these guys are leading the way. And it's not their day job. It's actually something, you know, from, as you say, sort of, you know, it's a personal passion that they've then managed to bring into a business and make that happen. And I think, you know, the trend really needs to be looking at from, you know, that very top level, as we discussed, that strategy on a local level, and, you know, sort of much further beyond, how we really drive that change. And it's not just an add-on, like you say, a nice to have anymore. It's really about going, well, the city have got this ambition, you know, the combined authority are leading on this. We need to buy into this, and we need to make it happen, and not just, you know, do a few token gestures along the way. And I think that's sort of much more fundamental buying into the policy, and that engagement is really where we'll start to see some real change, hopefully, you know, to achieve that 2038 goal.
Yeah, absolutely. There is definitely that shift towards people starting to ask those questions. So even if they're not making the change yet, it's having that awareness and going, well, who is responsible, and what happens when this leaves here? You know, who does run the building? Who sorts out waste? What is my travel company doing? That, yeah, asking those questions, then the next step is obviously to be able to take that accountability. So Kat, obviously a huge part of what you do here around kind of those consumer trends, and obviously we talked about that kind of generational shift, but what would you say kind of the one or two key changes that we're seeing across the industry?
Well, I think actually, you know, everyone's raised some really, really interesting points in the answer to that first question. I think one of the things that Melissa raised around this definition of sustainability, and I think it's about your ethics, really, I think, as a business. It's not about, oh, we need to tick a box on the green box, or, you know, it's about, and it's that sort of, you know, ethical nature, I think. And I think so that's really important. So the trend I would therefore say on that is transparency. And I think that is in whatever sector you're working in. You know, I think, again, if I was to look at the retail sector, the food retailers did a lot from sort of farm to fork, and kind of being able to track kind of where your food is coming from. And that's a trend that we've now seen kind of moving into more in the fashion industry. So again, you know, there's a huge issue with, I know we haven't been in our offices for a while, but if, again, as obviously I work in an office with a lot of people who want to be buying the latest stuff off ASOS or Boohoo or whatever, huge amount of kind of problems about people over ordering, because actually they're ordering 3 sizes of a top, knowing that they can send one back. And that's actually becoming a huge problem, because all of this packaging and waste and kind of, you know, it's just causing kind of literal landfill. So again, you know, you see some of the brands like H&M have now started putting kind of clothes onto actual real size people rather than just size 6 people. So that people can see, well, actually, if I'm a size 12, I can see what that looks like, rather than having to order back. So I think there's been some really interesting changes pre-pandemic around that. But I think, you know, obviously the stories we've seen around, you know, sadly, someone talked about it, the price we're willing to pay. People are used to paying £2 for a top, and that comes with a cost. And we've seen that over the last few weeks with the reports of obviously the kind of fast fashion that is being created. Now, obviously Manchester has been home to a huge amount of those fast fashion businesses. And that's not to obviously, you know, condemn them. I'm sure a lot of them are not working those ways, but I think the consumer is just going to demand so much more in terms of, even if you're telling me you can create a top for £2, I want to understand the journey that's been on. So I think it's these issues of ethics and sustainability and tracing are all so interwoven. So I think for me, like, transparency is a really, really big trend. I think the second one I just wanted to touch on is around, and a number of people talked about it, Dennis talked about it in terms of his business setup, is local. So again, we've seen this huge kind of shift with people working from home. You know, we've obviously seen over the last week or so all of the headlines around kind of, you know, concerns about needing to get people back into city centres, because, you know, Pret has been sort of brought out as the kind of, we need to save Pret, pace the child. I mean, I'm a fan of Pret, so I'm not dissing Pret in any shape or form. But I think what's been really interesting is, again, you know, people have seen that there is a coffee shop in their local community. There is kind of, you know, the ability to go to a butcher's and a fishmonger and all of those things that, you know, almost seemed a bit kind of, I think someone talks about eco, and it seems a bit like hippie a few years ago, whereas now everyone wants to support that kind of local economy. So there's huge challenges therefore on this city and town agenda. And I think even when we look at kind of GM as a whole, like, you know, the city centre's obviously really quiet at the moment, But, you know, you look at the towns on the outskirts and they're already booming. So it's that kind of like localness. But again, I think what people have liked is, A, they feel that businesses who are maybe stretched and struggling, they're able to kind of put money into them. But B, that it's back to that kind of transparency and knowing, you know, I know Jim who runs a fishmonger and I'm putting the money in his pocket rather than thinking, is it going to one of the big retailers? So I think there's going to be a really interesting shift as well over this kind of city v town, local v more centralised agenda, which obviously, you know, there's huge benefits from a sustainability perspective, but it's again going to be, how does that weigh up against kind of the cost and the job implications? So I think for me, yeah, definitely transparency and the kind of local agenda are the two big trends I'm seeing at the moment.
Yep, and that's one that's very close to my heart as somebody who lives in Wigan and works predominantly in central Manchester. 20 minutes on a train is a different world. So, you know, you're into Manchester and, you know, to use Bratt as the example, you know, on every corner, part of my day-to-day experience. And suddenly people in Wigan are like, oh, maybe we'll get a Bratt, because that footfall is increasing, that it's something that for town cities that are so close together, it's starting to shift that movement. And it's the real challenge as we come out of this is, can we do something that's great in the city centre and do stuff that's really great in our local town centres? And hopefully there is something there, you know, driven by the transparency, driven by that need to support our communities, we might come out with a better balance. So Charlie, any key trends amongst your industry or your customers that you're starting to see?
Yes, I think there's two things really for me that I'm seeing, and they're areas where there's going to have to be a huge amount of work, I suspect. One is it needs to be a properly joined up approach across a number of different sectors. I'm thinking, you know, predominantly about things like, if I use waste management as an example, you know, you've got to make sure that you've got a transport sector that is able to use electric vehicles in order to transport waste from city centres to waste handling units, and then to be managed, recycled, and to create energy from waste. But in order to do that, you need sufficient energy storage capacity to enable you to have enough recharging points. And until you get that, you can't get proper electric, you know, commercial vehicles. So you're only ever doing sort of part of the job. You know, that without naming names, there are other parts of the country where municipal waste is transported hundreds of miles to be processed because there hasn't been an infrastructure in that locality to be able to deal with that. So whilst the consumer quite rightly feels they're doing their bit to recycle, the truth of it isn't quite what it's intended to be. So I think there needs to be a sort of joined up plan where all key aspects are actually factored in and are managed properly. I think the other trend, and this is more what I think we need rather than what I'm seeing. We've seen a huge amount of globalization, particularly around, again, waste management, transport, which is dominated by 2 or 3 companies. Those companies are owned by international organizations. I think a lot of the locality gets lost in that piece because it's not a one-size-fits-all. So Manchester's needs and Manchester's geography and the needs of its outlying towns through GMCA are very different to that of Birmingham or Los Angeles or Copenhagen. And I think what we ought to see is a lot more partnerships between local authorities and local businesses to try and generate a much more local means of managing, you know, waste, renewable energy, battery storage, electrical charge points that actually deals with what that particular area needs. And I think that's what we're going to see. Just one other thing I think that is going to have to be dealt with, and this is from a lawyer's sort of contractual basis, we've got to have a completely different means of contracting. I think we have to move towards partnering and profit sharing arrangements, because I think we've seen a number of massive projects that have run out of control, run way past budget, and have put a number of businesses into insolvency because the requirement was for a business to take an unmanageable risk. And I think we're going to have to find different ways of, and I'm sure Melissa's quite heavily involved in this, different ways of procuring that manages the risk and works fairly between the suppliers and the purchasers to help deliver these schemes. Otherwise, quite a lot of these projects will be pipe dreams, really. And off my soapbox now.
Absolutely. What's really interesting though is from a completely different industry and standpoint to Kat, actually those trends are quite similar, that it's transparency and it's keeping things local. And I think that is what we're starting to see, and going into profit share and procurement models is it is actually just that really open piece of being like, this is what we need, all open, all transparent. What does the local area need and how can we meet that? That whether you're looking at retail or you're looking at waste management, actually there's some quite similar drivers there. And as you say, leads beautifully into Melissa, who's obviously got the expertise in procurement. What kind of trends are you seeing within those procurement processes and frameworks?
Well, as I was sat there listening, I was thinking actually we've got at YPO we've got two real main customer bases. So if we look at our local authority customers as a starter, they're all about the local agenda, and they all want to help improve their local businesses and support their local businesses as well. So really trying to understand how we can do that. I keep saying it, and it's kind of like my buzzword is a challenge. We're a national framework provider. That's not what we are. I hate saying that, but that's, we do provide national frameworks. So actually then how do we help our customers access their local suppliers when we don't have a local presence, if that makes sense? It is quite difficult. So I always talk about the fact that our procurements are actually, what we should do is unlock the potential for our customers to drive their agendas and drive their priorities. So yeah, it's challenging trying to break down those normal ways or old ways of working, and just this is just the way I always do things, to bring in that this is a new way of doing it. This is actually, I talk about sustainable procurement or responsible procurement, actually is just good procurement. It's just good at engaging with absolutely everybody who can provide that goods or services for you. It's just about doing that good engagement piece and market research and actually trying to deliver the true core and necessity of what it is you're trying to procure, rather than just trying to overcomplicate everything. So it's interesting to be a part of that. And the other side of it as well is we are one of the largest providers into the education sector. So we produce a massive catalogue which goes out to around 30,000 schools every year. And what is interesting is that I have been getting letters and emails from school eco councils, from quite angry school children saying, what are you doing as a supplier to our school in order to reduce the negative impact that that you are having, and that what plastic are you reducing, and the packaging and all that kind of stuff. So same as what Kat was saying earlier, that younger generation are the ones that are really keen on this, and actually the school children are the ones that are really vocal about it and quite demanding, and they don't take any prisoners when they're writing in about what they expect of their suppliers. So that's been really interesting, and kind of one of the areas that we're trying to help, and picking up on the waste management piece, is around actually, I can say, oh yes, this packaging is recyclable, but it is recyclable in my area, but not necessarily in somebody else's area. So one of the biggest issues we're having at the moment is with glue sticks, because they're made from plastic. People use them and then throw them away. But the plastic can be recycled. It's just a case of if your infrastructure allows it to be recycled. But when the figures we've been quoted by a really big brand is that actually on average in a primary school setting, where you go through 1 glue stick per child per term. So the figures are saying that there are like 19 million glue sticks out there that, somebody needs to do something with, and we're trying to figure out if there is something that can be done. So it's really interesting to see the different approaches that people are taking, whether it's a local authority or schools, actually what matters to them and how they're turning to their suppliers in order to help them come up with some solutions.
Amazing. And like you say, sometimes it is those really niche things that it's actually, once you start looking at it, there's presumably then big knock-on effects in terms of just being able to standardise what's recyclable and how it works would make a big difference. But really interesting that again, that younger generation coming through. One of the things that really stood out to me at the first Green Summit was the BBC talking about the blue planet effect, that it was suddenly a lot of children watching this and being like, hang on a minute, like what's going on here? And it really awakened that generation to what was going on. And you'd suddenly find, parents are being challenged by their children in terms of, why aren't we driving an electric vehicle? Why are we doing things this way? Why aren't we recycling? That's the way the push is coming from, which is hopefully quite promising. So Dennis, just coming on to you then, and key trends that you wanted to highlight.
Yeah, thanks, Ilona. I think it's definitely a case that I'm seeing more and more businesses developing their sort of social and ethical conscience, and that's typically in response to the demands from their customers and their people. I think the real challenge there then is for organisations to make sure that they're transparent, but there's also this point about authenticity as well. So what you say, do you actually do what you say you're going to do? And that speaks to the transparency. But I think we've certainly seen a couple of high-profile cases in the media over the sort of past year or so where perhaps there is that sort of lack of authenticity. I think for me, what's interesting is why I'm seeing that local is becoming a lot more important. So I do a lot of work with public sector clients, and I guess just picking up on Melissa's point about social value, we're really seeing that that's coming to the fore now, and there's been a real shift in focus away from price into value and actually creating impact at a local or regional level. Practical example, GM has been really good in actually leading the way there. So probably over the past 5 years, I've seen the sort of percentage attributed to social value increase from about 5% in some cases to typically consistently 20% going forward. So that just really emphasises the importance of this to organisations, both public and private sector. So I think that's a great testament to some of the work that's being done in GM, particularly. But I think there's also, when you actually talk to organisations, there's a really sound business and economic case for why you do this. It's not just this thing that we do on the periphery. It's actually the core of how we do business. And we're really seeing a sort of shift in some of the reasons why people are doing it. It used to be we're just doing it because we want to show that we've got some environmental creds. Whereas now, it's fascinating that people can be pursuing these projects because actually it helps them generate revenue. It's a thing about brand. It could be cost reduction, or it may be risk management and resilience. And certainly that resilience point is, over the past sort of 6 months, really become absolutely key. Is understanding their value chain end to end, and actually are they resilient? Can it open up new business models, things like that. Which is really fascinating. I suppose for me, some of the things I would like to see happen more, I think there's some sort of embryonic moves, but better stakeholder management I think is really key. So this isn't just something that you do in isolation, it's something that you need to consult all of your stakeholders on and actually get their input in a meaningful way, rather than present a fait accompli as this is our strategy around sustainability. And then that leads me into the sort of next point about collaboration through the value chain. So we often look at what can we do as our business, but actually, the real impact, the real value is how you then collaborate across the value chain with your suppliers, with your customers, as well as what you do yourself. And that's the bit that's really, really hard, but it's the element that's the most impactful. I think we start to see that with some businesses, but that's the area that there's a real opportunity, I think. A practical example there is, Slalom developed an initiative around Tech for Good, where we work with some of our customers and some of our suppliers on projects like, assessing the health of the coral reef in Australia using machine learning. And that just wouldn't be possible as something that Slalom does on its own. It only works when we work with our technology partners and some of our customers. And I think the final thing for me is just around public policy. We've seen a lot come out from both central government and sort of local regional governments around the green agenda. I think in Manchester, actually, it's pretty coherent, probably not well known enough. But I would like to see probably more coherent public policy and joined up public policy from government, particularly central government, rather than isolated policies from particular departments. I think that would make things a lot easier for us to really kickstart and bolster the sustainability agenda.
Absolutely, and like you say, it's about bringing all of those things together. So if we're all doing little bits in different places, it's not going to have the same impact as pulling all of those things into one. And somebody used the phrase the other day, and it's a slight cliche, but I really liked it, and it was that good business is good business, and that idea that actually what's right for you commercially can also be the best thing for the planet and your people, and that it's no longer this choice between kind of purpose or profits, but that actually if we've got a strong social purpose and we're doing the right thing, we are now in a world where that's going to pay off with your customer base and your market. So finally to you then, Scott, on those kind of key trends that you're starting to see in the travel industry towards more sustainability.
Yeah, well, I think in the short term, there's been a huge shift in demand for particular types of products. As you can imagine, sort of the UK boom in holidaying in this country, obviously because it's the only place really guaranteed where there's no quarantine, and that being very focused around self-catering and staying in your bubbles. And I think most travel companies would say what they have seen is a shift in inquiries towards perhaps the types of places that we would ordinarily send people anyway, so we're perhaps a little bit ahead of the curve. So people wanting to do road trips across rural Canada, or places where they're already isolating because they're literally the only people there. I think the people talking about partnerships is absolutely key. I think for me there has to be more. What I am hoping a lasting trend is people starting to reflect more about the impact their travel has on the country that they go to. And I don't really want to pick out individual brands or types of travel, because obviously I'm mindful I'm trying to speak for the whole industry. But as you can imagine, 3,000 people turning up in a small town at the same time with food prepaid for where they've come from are not really going to probably contribute much to that economy, rather than maybe a fridge magnet, and then they go back. Like if you stay in a local hotel, take all-inclusive, for example. Brits love all-inclusive far more than any other country. Do we need all-inclusive? Like, we very, very rarely sell it, and if people want it, we question, do you need it? Okay, granted, if you're on the Maldives, it doesn't make a difference, you can't leave the island. But if you go into a city and it's all inclusive, again, imagine someone coming to Manchester, staying in the Hilton, having all their meals prepaid for and going home. They haven't really contributed much to Manchester. They haven't tasted Rudy's Pizza, for example, or many other of the individual brands that we all know and love. So I think what I am hopeful is people step back and think about why are they travelling and what do they want to get out of it. And therefore it becomes much more of a partnership between, I'm going to this amazing country and I want to enjoy it and experience it and indulge myself in it. And that means actually taking some of that safety net around that I don't need. I don't need all my meals prepaid for in the hotel, because I can walk down the street and I can have the most amazing seafood I've ever had in my life. That's what I'm hoping will come out of this. And I think because of that, they need to be part of the discussion. Waste management, for example, that the waste impact of over tourism is huge. I went to the Turtle Islands off Borneo, and they have entire towns made of plastic that they picked out the ocean, and most of that's come from the Philippines, but that's not Philippines rubbish, it's probably Western rubbish that's been shipped to the Philippines because someone somewhere's thought they're probably recycling it. So all of this, no industry is in a silo. We're talking about recycling and targets. I actually get quite sad. I love going around the house and putting stuff in the recycling bin and not the waste bin. And the sad reality is, if that process doesn't work, that ends up being a house off island off Borneo, because it's cheaper to send it somewhere else. So I think we all need to be mindful of, we are in a very, very connected economy, and but what we do here has an impact for people on the ground. I've sort of gone off on a tangent, but actually I think that's
have actually beautifully segued into the final question. I'm going to pretend you planned it. So the final thing that I kind of wanted to ask from all of you, because I think you are all passionate about sustainability in your industries. We're starting to see a movement in the right direction, that really wanted to end this on quite a positive and on something that hopefully people watching can kind of take away, is to what you kind of see as the key opportunity here. So whether that's something that you've seen personally within your business, within the industry, what's the one thing that if people watching this, you can say, like, here's an opportunity to go and make that change? What is the opportunity that you'd like to see? And I know we kind of touched on a couple of things if you'd come through, but just if there's one thing that you'd say, if you do this, ask this question, behave in a certain way, what would you like to see people do more of? So I'm just going to come to you first, Kat. What's your key opportunity that you'd like to share?
So I think, like, as you said, lots of stuff's kind of blended and kind of we've talked about a lot of stuff throughout, but I think it's just that point of questioning, like, you know, if you're going to create an action, what is the impact that has? So that could be from, you know, thinking about what rubbish you're putting into your recycling, and is that going to end up creating a plastic city elsewhere? If you're buying a £2 top, where does that actually come from? So I think that just people kind of, you know, taking that little bit more time to just really question that kind of journey. And that could be, you know, it spans kind of everything, you know, whether we're talking about more kind of ethical behaviours in sourcing, through to recycling, through to, you know, thinking about, am I going to shop kind of locally or whatever? So I think it's just that, for me, it's that kind of, if we've taken some positives from this pandemic, I think, you know, everyone has had a bit more time for kind of reflection and thinking about choices. So I think for me, it is just that questioning and kind of mindfulness about kind of those decisions. And that actually, if, you know, it always sounds a bit trite to say, if we all do one small thing, it will be great collective good. But I do think on a lot of these decisions, and I think, I can't remember who talks about it, but, you know, it doesn't have to be in your job title at your business to be passionate about it. And I think as lots of people talked on, you know, the younger generation, the pester power, all of that stuff is like, it's great that, you know, maybe not so much when Melissa's getting angry letters from 8-year-olds or whatever, but, you know, that's the kind of society we surely want to be kind of driving and creating. So I think it's just down to that kind of, make it your responsibility, and all of your actions, whether on a personal or professional level, will have an impact. So I guess that's my soapbox moment for the webinar.
And I think it's worth mentioning, actually, that the GM Green Summit is run in collaboration with the Combined Youth Authority, and there is that real strong youth voice that are so passionate about green and sustainability. So for those of you who are watching from the younger demographic, please know we want to be held to account. Keep shouting, keep writing your angry letters, because that is what's forcing the change. And I think, you know, we see those examples of people like Greta Thunberg on this kind of huge scale impact, but sometimes it is just those small letters that are actually making those changes in businesses. So yeah, absolutely. Charlie, what would your key opportunity be?
I think it's an opportunity to look at real partnering within the construction, infrastructure, development, energy space. It's been something that the construction industry has tried to work with over many years, and it's never really taken off for a whole host of reasons. But I think this is the one classic opportunity to look at a completely different way of contracting and working between purchasers, suppliers, local public authorities, national authorities, central government, local government, to drive innovation, to drive delivery, to give proper returns to all stakeholders within that. And I think it's the one real opportunity we've got now. And I think this has been enhanced by the great difficulties of 2020 to rewrite the rule book. And I think over delivering sustainability and using that word in its widest context, I think it's a great opportunity to look at a different way of delivering projects that doesn't follow the traditional commercial models necessarily, because as I'm seeing, some of those traditional contractual structures just don't fit as they are at the moment. So, you know, let's embrace it and let's find a way of partnering and delivering this as a joint enterprise.
Yep, and I think you completely echo there one of the strap lines that we've seen from Andy Burnham and from Steve Rotherham around that build back better, that actually if we don't have to go back to normal, that if we have had this period of somewhat of chaos and hardship, that there is an opportunity there to go, right, well, now's the time that we can just choose to do something in a different way. So hopefully that will give us the catalyst to make those improvements. Melissa?
Yeah, so, you know, just echoing what Kat was saying around asking the questions is the opportunity, and, you know, people just having that inquisitive mind just to say, okay, so, you know, where is this coming from? Why is that important? You know, whether that's asking their suppliers or their teachers, their families, whatever, but also themselves. So why do I want this, and do I actually need this, and how can I make those changes? But also from a procurement sense, and we've almost got through a whole panel without mentioning the B word that used to be on everybody's agenda, but actually with impending Brexit and all that kind of sense, from a procurement perspective, we're bound by the EU procurement regulations, but actually, you know, we're not going to be anymore. So we have a real opportunity to make a difference to those. And, you know, if we can rewrite that rule book in terms of how we actually do those procurements, and that could be, you know, a whole range of things of actually working more closely with small organisations, with local organisations, encouraging that collaboration between all different types of organisations, really pinning down what is important. And for anybody who's in procurement, I would always really recommend, actually, rather than just rehashing the same old thing again, actually taking that time to ask those questions and to say, okay, what is it that I am wanting to, why is it that we're procuring this goods, these services, whatever it is, and actually trying to get to the real heart of it and seeing actually how you can then build it up to actually make some real positive impact while still delivering those essential goods or services that you are trying to procure as well.
Fantastic. So another call there for that kind of step back, get to the heart of what we're doing, and hopefully do it in a better way. Dennis?
Thanks. I really love that concept that you were talking about earlier about build back better. And for me, you know, successful sustainability is all about this idea of collective responsibility. So I guess my sort of request would be for people, you know, to engage your people, whether that's your customers, your suppliers, your colleagues, but also collaborate with your value chain. So, you know, learn from others and realise that, you know, be humble, that you don't necessarily have to have all of the answers, and take that sort of wide, holistic view. And I think the final thing is just really be bold with your commitments. You know, make it the core of your business. This is what you do. It's not, you know, it's not an optional thing.
Brilliant. And yeah, collaboration, you know, it's one of the things Manchester's known so well for, is having that really collaborative feel to it. And I think what Manchester's been able to do over the last few years wouldn't have been possible without that public-private third sector collaboration that's going on. And it's great to see a global business like Slalom come in and not just be based in Manchester, but to really kind of make Manchester its home and engage in that community is a real example, I think, to others that are coming in. Scott, you obviously started on some of yours there. Is there anything else there that you'd see as a kind of a key opportunity for driving sustainability within travel?
Yeah, sure. I think certainly, like do your research. I'd say definitely work with a travel partner. I think they're coordinating sustainable travel much more than, you know, the DIY platforms. I think just because it's much more integrated, and, like, you know, certain providers won't sell certain products if they don't meet their requirements and whatever. And I think certainly is to be just a bit braver. Take that extra step outside of your comfort zone. Do you need all your meals pre-provided? You know, walk the back streets, take the slow road. You know, if you're going to travel in this world that's affected, and we've seen how it's affected everyone around it, let's embrace it, and let's remember why we travel. You know, we travel to switch off and recharge, and to fall in love with somewhere else and maybe bring a little bit of it home. And I think the more you sit in a big resort and don't leave the side of the pool, that it's a wasted opportunity to do that. And I think we need to be mindful that we're all fortunate to to be able to travel somewhere else and experience it. But that's it for me as a passionate travel professional.
that remember why you travel, I just think is brilliant. And we've spoken obviously a bit about this move towards more of us are working from home and less business travel, that, you know, were any of us really excited about a commute in the same way we're excited about going and experiencing another culture? And as we do kind of change some of those daily patterns, you know, maybe there is more of an opportunity to really embrace those other cultures when we're there. So Katie, I'm just going to come to you finally then for kind of opportunities for kind of the wider business community to engage in the sustainability.
Yeah, I think, you know, there's been so many good points raised. It would really kind of just to sort of summarise with those really. And I think we're really fortunate, you know, on a more sort of local level, you know, to be part of the you know, sort of the Greater Manchester Combined Authority and have that really forward thinking structure. So we have, you know, all those individual boroughs leading into sort of ahead with Andy Burnham, who, you know, it's clearly on his agenda. You know, we're going ahead with the Green Summit despite the pandemic. You know, it would have easily, you know, kind of made sense to push it back to next year, but actually we're going ahead. September, let's make it happen. Let's bring these people, let's get it back on the agenda. As we said before, building back better, put that on people's kind of, you know, radars, and make sure that as we're bringing people back in the office, that this is kind of making people talk, and by asking the questions, but also having the information available to make those changes and engaging with other businesses and understanding what are they doing, or can we think about, you know, taking some inspiration and making some shifts really. And I think, you know, as we said, that collaboration is what makes Manchester brilliant, and actually having that collective objective to really make that change. And I think, you know, sort of the piecemeal bits and bobs, you know, it's small changes helpful, but I think if we can bring all of that power together to make some meaningful change, you know, it's best for everybody. As we said, it makes good business sense. It's better for, you know, our sort of mental health and well-being, and, you know, that generational, you know, our 8-year-olds, you know, fighting the good fight for their glue sticks are going to come into the sort of, you know, workplace, you know, in a much better position, like, you know, going forward. So I think it's just about engaging, asking those questions, and, you know, really, you know, push forward with our agenda for the, you know, carbon neutral for 2038 would be my suggestion.
Wonderful, thanks Katie, and thanks to all of you for taking part in the discussion. I've certainly learned a lot about it, and what's been really interesting to see is how many of those trends are replicated regardless of the sector that you're working in, whether that's for your organisation or for your customers and suppliers. We're hugely passionate at Elevate to keep that conversation going. Those issues around transparency, asking the questions, collaboration are very much at the heart of everything we want to do, and we're really keen that whilst the Green Summit beautifully ties in with our launch and that we're able to use this platform, which is wonderful, we don't want it to be this is an annual conversation that we have. We want to make sure that those conversations around sustainability, around supply chains, around health and well-being, all of those wonderful things that we've talked about continue to be part of that conversation. So I really hope that this discussion's been of value to all of our speakers and to everyone watching, and I'm really excited to see how those conversations will continue in the months and years to come.